Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to share some tips and ideas for having positive visits with the person in your life who's living with dementia. My name is Chris Van Leuven, and with me today is Shelby Berry, and we are education coordinators of the Alzheimer's Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton. We recognize that throughout our discussion, there might be some questions that come up. And in the interest of time, and because we're not always able to see the chat pod when we're sharing a PowerPoint screen, we'd ask you to please just hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Do feel free, though, to jot any questions that you might have in the chat pod, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the presentation today so that we can discuss them. Thank you in advance for your help with that. So family, friends, neighbors, and extended family are all important sources of support for both the family members and the person who's living with dementia. But uncertainty of what to expect might prevent some people from visiting a person with dementia. So today we're going to talk about some helpful suggestions for visitors. We all enjoy visits from our family and our friends, and people with dementia are really no different. Visits can be a source of comfort and support and a way to stay connected with others. Whether you're visiting someone with dementia every day or just once in a while, making the most of your time together will mean a more meaningful visit for both of you. And over the next slides, we'll discuss some tips to make visits easier, more comfortable, and more meaningful for everybody. I went ahead too. So people by nature are social beings, and connecting with others is really an important part of our livelihood. As we learned during the pandemic, when we're forced to isolate, it can have negative impacts on our health and on our well-being. This is especially true for those that are living with dementia. Social isolation can both increase your risk of developing dementia, and it can worsen the symptoms of dementia for people that are already living with the disease. Social stimulation and connections are really important for our overall brain health and our wellness, and staying socially active can reduce stress, can brighten your mood, and it can keep your relationships with others strong. It's important to find fun and enjoyable ways to maintain those social connections. And this can be accomplished by planning social time around an activity. So activities could be things like having lunch together or going to a music program together, participating in a social tea or a church or religious service, or even just an outing like a walk or a trip to the park or the zoo. By making regular social plans, we help to provide purpose for the person. We give them something to look forward to and to structure their day around. It's beneficial for everyone, including people with dementia, to stay engaged and to stay busy. Keeping our brains active and stimulated is really key when it comes to the maintenance and the improvement of our brain health. As that old saying goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's why it's important that we continue to find ways to challenge our brains. So how can we incorporate strategies for brain health into our visits? First, it's important that we find an activity that's mutually enjoyable or of interest to both parties. Otherwise, you kind of risk losing that benefit of social connection. You can play a game or work on a project together as a way to connect. And by doing so, you create a bit of a sense of purpose to the visit, and you provide something to look forward to. For example, you could listen to music or maybe watch a video of a concert. You could go, like during the pandemic, they created all these different virtual tours of museums globally. So you could do something like that, or a virtual tour of a zoo. You can play a game together. There's one app that we've learned about which was developed by Dementia Australia. And it's 4 tablets, so either an Apple iPad or an Android tablet of some type. And it's called A Better Visit. And it's designed to help caregivers, family members, and friends to engage with the person living with dementia in their life. So I do have a link for that, and I can post it a little while later. Another suggestion is to find ways to appeal to all the senses. So things like aromatherapy, where it's permitted, a sound machine with sounds of nature, maybe projecting some lights, giving the person tactile fabrics to hold, or fidget toys. All of those things can help to stimulate the senses. And you can continue to try new and different things and select activities that really appeal to a variety of those sensory modalities. Planning regularly scheduled visits with your friend or family member who lives with dementia helps to support their emotional well-being. So visiting, it helps to alleviate feelings of loneliness, isolation, abandonment, fear, anxiety, and suspiciousness. In addition to your presence, touch is a really powerful tool for providing that emotional support and fostering those feelings of connectedness. Familiar touch can include a hug or just simply holding the person's hand. And having open body language can also be helpful to communicate our attention and our supportiveness. By offering a comforting smile or comforting glance, just having that approach might help to calm the person's anxiety that they could be experiencing or fear. People with dementia can often remember the distant past more easily than recent events. If you can find a way to help trigger those more distant or pleasant memories, the person might become more animated and they might become more interested. So how do we do this? I've got some tips. You can talk about the past together, and you can do this while looking at old family photos or books with pictures, or while listening to music. You could make up a memory box, and in this box, you could put objects that the person with dementia might be interested in. Sometimes physically handling things might trigger memories more easily than looking at pictures alone. You can talk about shared interests. So maybe, you have a similar taste in books or TV shows, or maybe you're big sports fans and you can talk about the different sports that you enjoy. And you can share some favorite stories that have happened over the past years. Another way is to celebrate special milestones together, like birthdays or anniversaries. Sharing and reminiscing, really, it helps to pass the time in a meaningful way. And it's also kind of fun to go down memory lane as well. Planning time to visit with a person living with dementia can be meaning and beneficial for both you as the visitor and the person that you're visiting. For yourself as a visitor, it's important to recognize the impact that your presence has. You can feel really good about the role that you and your visits play in helping the person to feel valued and included. During your visits, it's all about enjoying each other's company and discovering ways to connect. So try and be present in the moment during your visits and make a conscious effort not to focus on the clock while you're there. You want to immerse yourself in the experience of that visit. By dedicating this time, you're creating memories that you can carry with you, even as the person's abilities change. And at this time, I'm going to hand things over to Shelby, and she's going to share some concrete strategies with you for making your visits meaningful ones.
Thank you, Kristen. I was able to put the Dementia Australia app in the chat for you, so it's there if you're interested in checking that out as well. So there are some helpful tips that we can consider before we even start the visit with the person with dementia that can really help set the stage for a valuable visit. So these tips include preparing what you want to bring. So photographs, videos, and letters are effective ways of connecting with the person that you're visiting. If there's a particular treat that they enjoy, you could try to bring that for them as well. So preparing what you want to bring can be really important. You could check for special events that you could enjoy together. So if the person with dementia is living in a retirement home or a long-term care setting, you could check with the staff or check out the activity calendar to see if there's maybe a music program or something that would be interesting for you to go to together. We can also set the stage by eliminating any potential distractions in the environment around us. So this can really help set the stage for more effective communication. So this involves turning off any background noise. So for example, turning off a TV or a radio, or perhaps closing the door or the window to make the visit peaceful and less confusing. And we also want to make sure that the room is well lit so that we can more easily see each other during that visit. If the person with dementia uses hearing aids or wears glasses, we want to make sure that they are using these so that they can hear us and see us properly during the visit. And we also want to encourage the person that you're visiting to make decisions about how they want to spend that time together during the visit, if possible. This can really help to enhance feelings of independence and self-esteem. So it's generally a good idea to limit choices. So try asking, would you like to go for a walk or sit here and chat? If that's too much choice or too much information, we could try using questions that would have a yes or no answer. So we might ask, would you like to go for a walk? And perhaps, holding up their coats as well could really help send that message of what it is that we're asking them. We also want to arrange a convenient time to visit. So finding out the best time of day to visit can be really helpful. And here we want to consider the person's daily schedule. So for example, when are they up and ready for the day? Are they an early riser? Do they tend to be, slower to start in the morning? Considering when their meal times are. And also, are there certain activities that happen during the day that they don't want to miss? So, perhaps there's a daily exercise class that they really like to go to. So we want to avoid that time for visiting and maybe finding a different gap in the day when there's not as much on that would provide a good social time for them when they have nothing else scheduled. Also consider the best time of day to visit. So, this might be in the middle of the day or early in the day when perhaps they're not tired yet. It could be joining them for a meal, perhaps if they seem that they are maybe lonely or would enjoy some conversation during mealtime, maybe coming and visiting at lunch or dinner would be helpful. And a visit could also be a welcomed distraction. If the person's experiencing some late day restlessness in the late afternoon, perhaps when there's that staff shift change, when all the staff members are going home, sometimes that can kind of contribute to that late day restlessness. So maybe visiting during that time would be a welcomed distraction. And we also want to make sure the length of the visit is appropriate. And this really varies, from each visit sometimes or for each person with dementia. And it's important to know that visits do not have to be long to have a positive impact. If you visit regularly, you'll start to figure out what an appropriate length will be for a visit. And you can also consider asking other family members or friends that visit what works well for them. And also keeping in mind that visiting times may also vary, depending on the day. So we want to make sure that we're remaining open and flexible with regards to that length of time as well. And humor and laughter can be such an important part of visiting the person with dementia. Laughter truly is the best medicine, and it is contagious. So, laughter can boost our mood. It can release endorphins, which are those, the happy hormones, and it can really help to relieve stress. So laughter can also help to ease, any feelings of maybe embarrassment or confusion if any awkward moments were to arise. So laughter can really just be great in so many levels. So we want to look for opportunities to laugh during your visit. And, taking time to remember fun times, humorous stories, and anecdotes could be one way to do that. So you could recall humorous experiences that you both shared. So for example, saying, I remember when we both, and then kind of launching into that funny story or that funny shared memory. If the person with dementia does not recall that shared experience, that's okay. They may still enjoy hearing the story, and they may find the story funny because, somewhere they may still connect with that story or find parts of it familiar. Also consider telling jokes, or you could look at old funny photos or watch videos of, say, pets, or, the funny things that the grandchildren are up to lately. Those can all be really great ways to share laughter. And we also want to try our best to take pleasure in each moment. So sharing in the moment is very meaningful and beneficial, even if the person doesn't remember it after. We can take comfort in knowing that they still enjoyed our visit and enjoyed our shared laughter in the moment. So, when you have a really good belly laugh and it seems to kind of last throughout the day, that funny moment, we're really kind of leaving that positive after effect as well. And as we prepare for a visit, we also want to be prepared to listen during that time together. So listening is more than just hearing what the person is saying. In fact, most of our communication actually happens with what we are not saying. So in other words, through our nonverbal cues or communication. Active listening involves paying attention to the person's body language, facial expressions, the tone and volume of their voice, and the emotions and messages that the person's trying to convey. And also remembering that they are reading those nonverbal cues from us as well. So we're sending nonverbal cues in that communication too. Rapport and conversation comes much easier if the person knows that you care about what they are saying. So ways to show you care can include facing the person when you're speaking with them, making eye contact during conversation, and talking to them at their level. So for example, if someone's sitting down, or perhaps if they're in a wheelchair, do our best to sit down beside them. So we're at their level with them and not standing over them. And we also want to show that we care by giving our full attention. So for example, we don't want to try to have a conversation with the person with dementia while we're doing something else, whether it's, looking at something else in their room, or if we're, at someone's house. We just want to be sitting down, looking at them, showing that we care and are giving that attention. And we also want to give them time to both listen and respond. So an important part of communication is really giving that time for the person to listen to what we've said and kind of formulate a response before we move on to something else. And people living with dementia may want to share their feelings as well during the visit. So we want to remain open and sympathetic to that as well. And the reality of visiting someone with dementia sometimes is that we may have to answer difficult questions that come up. And by doing so, you can acknowledge their feelings and reassure that they are safe and loved and cared for. So common questions that might come up during a visit that we often hear about is the person asking, when they can go home, or, when someone who passed away a long time ago is coming to visit them. So, as their memory changes and goes back into more of that long-term memory, some of these questions might come up when we visit. And another great way to establish a connection with the person with dementia is through common interests. So you can do this by finding out what hobbies and interests they have and planning your visit accordingly. So for example, you could bring in significant artifacts or photos if you have a lot of shared memories together. You could find out what hobbies and interests the person has. Consider watching a favorite TV show or a sport on TV together. So even our access to things like YouTube now, if you know someone was a sports fan of a certain championship team from a certain year, we often have access to, highlights and those things through technology today. We could listen to music together, considering what style of music they like. You could also play a game or work on a project together as a way to connect, create a sense of purpose, and provide something to look forward to. So keeping in mind that you may need to adapt or simplify the game or project to be in line with the person's current abilities. So examples may include, you might do a jigsaw puzzle together, but an adaptation might be that the puzzle may need to have less pieces, or perhaps the pieces may need to be bigger in size. You could label photographs together during your time together, perhaps make a scrapbook together, but simplifying that activity by having the person do one task. So perhaps the cutting or the gluing or just the sticking of the photos. Another idea would be to bring 2 copies of the same newspaper or book so that you could look at that together and discuss it. So again, finding things that align with the person's abilities and remaining strengths. Another idea would be having a relaxing time together with maybe a favorite movie and some treats. And another great tip is to connect with their past. So as we're talking about, the person with dementias maybe having more access to their long-term memories as opposed to their short-term memories, really connecting with things in their past can make that connection easier during a visit. So as an example, my mother-in-law's mother had Alzheimer's disease and was living in long-term care. And when she went to visit her, she used to always bring a bag of green beans because she said her mom loved cooking and she loved snapping the ends off the green beans and breaking them in half. It was a memory she always had of her mom when she was little. So when she would come to visit her mom in the long-term care home, she would bring the bag of green beans. She would set them down on the bed, not really even make any reference to them. And she said her mom would always kind of scurry over, get the beans and get to work. And she said it actually made it easier to connect with her too in terms of conversation because she just had this sense of calm about her. She was sitting there working on the beans and that was often a part of their visit together, accessing that connection with her past. And in general, with a visit, we really want to try to find ways to show that we care. This might be during a visit or even when we're not visiting, we can find ways to show that we care. So finding ways to show you care could involve sending cards or letters, bringing in the person's favorite foods, having children or grandchildren create pieces of art, letters, or poems. These are all great ways to show that we care. Other ways to show that we care could be remembering special celebrations and milestones, such as birthdays. Bring a child to visit, which can be fun and helps maintain that important relationship. Go outside to get the benefits of fresh air and exercise. It's so great to see the sun today. Having that as an option, again, will be great. Also find out if it's all right to bring a pet along. Animals can be calming, joyful, and help to make those connections, especially when someone may have trouble communicating as a result of dementia. Pets can be a great connection for them. And another suggestion is to ask around. So, you may have friends or family members who are interested in visiting the person with dementia, but They may be unsure or perhaps they're hesitant to come, especially if it's their first visit, since the person was maybe either diagnosed or since the person moved to long-term care, for example. So this is a good opportunity to ask them to come along, as visiting together can increase that sense of comfort and help remove some of those doubts. So for those who would like to visit but can't make it, you could also ask them, is it okay to phone or video call you, during the visit, or perhaps have them send an email or a letter that you could read to the person with dementia during your visit. And if family members live at a distance, you could have them send videos or photos that you could share during the visit. So really kind of asking around might be an option as well. Now, Chris is going to elaborate on some tips with relation to communication around visits.
Thanks so much, Shelby. So yeah, communication really is a vital part of our lives, and it allows us to express who we are. It allows us to relate to one another. Communication is more than talking and listening, because it often involves understanding, and it involves interpreting the message. Dementia affects how people express themselves, and it affects how people are able to understand what's being communicated to them. So for somebody living with dementia, maintaining a relationship can be a bit of a complex process, especially when their verbal communication has been affected. So some of the common changes that we see are, difficulty finding a word, creating new words for ones that may have been forgotten, repeating a word or a phrase, difficulty organizing words into logical sentences. So they're mixing their words up, and their sentences are coming out in a way that doesn't quite make sense. You might hear the person, cursing more than they did, or using more offensive language than you're used to in the past. They may, if English wasn't their first language, begin to revert to the first language that was learned. And the person may withdraw a little. They may start talking less than they usually would have. When a person living with dementia is experiencing these changes to their communication abilities, they might feel frustrated and they might feel discouraged. And it's important that we recognize the challenges the person is experiencing. And from our end, it's important that we remain calm and that we keep our patience about us. And also that we offer some words of encouragement. We're going to watch a video now which outlines some important tips and strategies to enhance communication with the person that you're visiting who lives with dementia.
A person living with dementia may have trouble expressing themselves or understanding what's being communicated. Try these 5 tips to help you stay connected. Tip 1 is use what you know about the person. What does the person like? Use that knowledge to suggest conversation topics or activities they may enjoy. Nurture the person's skills and abilities. Focus on what they can do instead of what they can't. When the person's making a choice, offer them a couple of options that you know they will like. Tip 2 is reduce distractions. Take notice of what's around you. This is a simple thing to do, but it can make a big difference. Identify possible distractions in the person's environment and try to minimize them. Account for any hearing or vision challenges the person may have. Make eye contact to help focus the person's attention. Tip 3 is chat face-to-face. When speaking with the person, be clear and concise. Avoid talking to the person if you're behind them or where they can't see you. Speak clearly using short and simple sentences. Show as well as talk. Using actions can help give your words meaning. The 4th tip is to be flexible, as it may not always go as planned. A person's abilities can change from day to day. So take a few moments at the beginning of the conversation to assess how they're doing. Look for changes in behavior and body language that may tell how the person's feeling, especially if they may indicate discomfort. Adjust to accommodate. When the person's unable to communicate verbally, Communicate through the senses, like touch. Our fifth tip is to stay positive. Help make the person feel comfortable by modeling the mood. Be aware of your own tone and body language. Connect instead of correct. Ignore mistakes and give encouragement. When you feel overwhelmed, take a step back and exhale. Remember to take care of yourself too. It's not easy to be there for the person living with dementia, while also taking care of yourself at the same time. There will be days when these tips don't seem to help, but your presence is still felt by the person living with dementia, even when it may not be obvious. And it's important that you find a healthy balance and ask for help when you need it. Remember, you're not alone. For more tips and examples for meaningful conversations with people living with dementia, please visit alzheimer.ca/communication.
No, no.
I do consider myself a dementia expert.
Sorry, everybody. I just didn't want to advance the slide. All right. So in addition to those 5 communication tips that were outlined in the video, we do have some strategies for enhancing communication during your visits. So one tip that we have here is to show that you have time and that you're not clock watching. So we want to give the person our attention. We don't want to look, as if we're impatient at all, or that we have, other things to do. We want to really make sure that we're connecting in a way that shows that we're present. We want to set the stage for a good visit by checking our body language at the door. So, even if we're not having the best day, if we can turn it around for the person in that moment. So entering their room or their home with a smile and a pleasant greeting. We want to try and use both verbal and nonverbal ways of connecting and making ourselves understood. So sometimes showing as well as talking can be helpful, and using actions can give your words meaning. So if you want to offer the person a cup of tea, showing them the teapot or indicating the teapot or indicating the cup might be a better way to do that along with our words than just asking. Similarly, we want to pay attention to the person's actions and their words. So we want to read their nonverbal cues and validate as needed. And we'll talk a little bit more about validation coming up. We want to avoid talking to the person if we're behind them or where they can't see us. So for some folks who live with dementia, their field of vision narrows. And oftentimes it means that they lose their peripheral vision and can only see kind of directly in front. So for us, our best approach is to make sure that we are in front of the person when we go to address them, because if we're standing to the side or if we're standing beside them and we say their name or we jump into a conversation or a sentence, they may not realize that we are talking to them because they can't see that we're addressing them. We want to speak clearly using short and simple sentences. And when we do so, we want to allow time for the person with dementia to listen to what it is we've said, process what it is that we've said, process that message, and then formulate the response and speak back to us. We often talk about, for folks living with dementia, they require an extra 30 seconds comparatively. So we want to give them that extra 30 seconds response time, just because they need that time to really formulate what it is that they'd like to say back to us. I think Shelby touched on this before, but we want to accommodate for any hearing or vision loss or difficulty. So make sure the person's wearing their hearing aids and glasses. Quiet time. So we often think that, we have to keep our visits like always doing something or always entertaining. But the quiet time during a visit can be meaningful as well. So remember, not all communication is verbal, and sometimes just sitting and holding a hand or sitting and just quietly sharing the moment together is the best approach. If something unpleasant comes up, or if you can tell the person is maybe feeling emotional, we can always try and redirect their attention from that unpleasant topic to something more pleasant. In the case that they're becoming agitated or upset, we don't want, if it's possible, to kind of change that topic of conversation and ease to something a little bit, more positive. That is a good tip. So for example, if the person is maybe complaining about the meals where they live, and you can tell that it's getting them upset to talk about it, if we can maybe stop talking about food and try and switch the direction of the conversation to something different, or that might be a good time to pull out some photos. We want to keep in mind that what we call the person that we're visiting, it might change over time. So as dementia progresses, the person that you're visiting, they may not recognize anymore that you are their son or their granddaughter, and calling them by their first name is often the most familiar option, so that they're aware that you're speaking to them. When it comes to the end of the visit, if you are concerned that the person you're visiting will be upset when it's time for you to leave, you can try to plan your departure with an event. So having the end of your visit coincide with going to a meal or to an activity can make a natural end to that visit, and can be a nice distraction for the person. So also refrain from saying goodbye at the end of a visit. Instead, you can say something like, see you again soon. I've really enjoyed our time together. It's important to note that the person living with dementia's communication abilities really, they can fluctuate. And they said that in the visit or in the video as well. So the person might have good days and they might have bad days. And this can depend on a number of factors, like the amount of sleep that they've gotten, the levels of stress that they're experiencing, other medical conditions that they might have as well, and their different needs. And on the days when these tips that we just went through and the tips that were in the video don't seem to be working, just remember that being there with the person is important, and your presence is still felt by them. Let's talk a bit about validation. So for people living with dementia, it's possible that their perception of reality can become somewhat confused. But it is their reality, and it is, what their brain is telling them is real. So we want to try and accept their reality and meet them where they are. We want to avoid contradicting them or convincing them that what they believe is untrue or that it's inaccurate. Trying to bring the person into our reality, or if we start arguing with them, is likely to cause some frustration, and that frustration will lead to a breakdown in communication. And if the person living with dementia says something that isn't true, you can try and find some creative ways around the situation rather than reacting negatively. Validation therapy is a term coined by an American social worker who's named Naomi Fell. And it's an approach to understanding the reality of the person living with dementia in order to facilitate better communication and support. Validation is really one of the most important communication strategies that we can use with people living with dementia, particularly if it's time when they're feeling anxious or if they're feeling confused or upset. Validation provides important feedback to the other person that you have understood their feelings and the meaning of their message, and that you're making every attempt to try to understand what it is that they are trying to communicate. To validate, you respond to the person by stating the meaning and the feeling behind the message in your own words. Sometimes we refer to this as summarizing or paraphrasing their words. And it's almost a check-in with them that you have understood correctly. Validation also means that you step into their shoes and to try to determine what it is that they're experiencing or how it is that they're seeing that situation. So you meet them where they're at and explore their sense of reality without making an attempt to bring them into our here and now reality. When we use validation as a communication strategy, we are able to enhance rapport, build trust with the person, create safety in the conversation, and we provide an opportunity for the person to feel and be successful. That's a little summary about validation. And on the next slide, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and Shelby's going to talk about visits from the caregivers or care partners' point of view.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, we wanted to take some time to acknowledge that, there are many emotions associated with being a caregiver and visiting a person living with dementia. So we wanted to take some time to acknowledge that. So caregivers can have many commitments and obligations, often related to family and work, that can create stress for the caregiver and compete with available time, energy, and the commitment to visiting the person living with dementia. And it's important to acknowledge that every caregiving scenario is different. So some caregivers may, need to leave work to care for the person living with dementia. Others may be seniors taking care of seniors, and others may be part of the sandwich generation, where they're often raising a young family while also being one of the primary caregivers for a parent or a family member with dementia. The caregiver may feel torn between all of these competing obligations. They may feel that they need to always be there, visiting whenever they have a spare moment in their schedules. While at the same time, they may be wondering when they will get some personal time for themselves. So these competing factors can bring about feelings of guilt, anxiety, isolation, worry, and disconnection. So we really wanted to take some time to touch on caring for the caregiver. So I'm sure many people joining us today are in a caregiving role. So finding some ways to take care of yourself as a caregiver. So first, we want to share the tip of being realistic about what you can and cannot do. So knowing your limits is important here. In addition, take time to communicate those limits with other family members or friends. Perhaps other people are feeling the same way, and the load could be lightened by creating a visiting or check-in schedule, for example. And always easier said than done, but do not take it personally. It's important to realize that the person with dementia's perceptions are often different than our own. So, an example that we sometimes hear is that people will say that the person with dementia, talks about how they never visit, even though they visit quite often. So again, we have to take comfort in knowing that we are visiting often and connecting with them in those moments that we are visiting, even though, they may not be holding on to that memory. Also, take care of yourself. So a big part of taking care of yourself can include taking time for yourself. So check in with yourself regularly to see how you are doing and what you might need. And don't be afraid to ask others for help as well. And remember the quality of the visit versus the quantity of visits. So focus on spending quality time together during the visits that you have planned. You could consider having a guest book in the person with dementia's room, where visitors can record, when they visited and leave a short message for the person with dementia and other family members about who visited and what they did together, for example. Another suggestion for maybe kind of creating a bit more time for yourself is of finding other ways to show you care without, physically visiting. So you could consider other ways to connect without, again, being physically present. So this could include a quick phone call to say goodnight. It could be leaving a card with the staff on the day that you visit and ask the staff to give that to the person with dementia on another day during that week. So again, another way to connect without physically being there. So just some suggestions there for some ways to take care of yourself as a caregiver with, all of the balancing act that can happen when supporting someone living with dementia. So we've covered a lot of content today. We're winding down our presentation now, but we wanted to share this resource with you. So if you're looking for more information about visits, this is a handy resource called Meaningful Visits. It's a pamphlet resource from the Alzheimer's Society. So there's the link there, which we can probably get into the chat for you in a moment if you just want to be able to click on that and open it up right before the presentation concludes today. And we also want to acknowledge, living with and supporting someone with dementia is not easy. And we want you to know that you are not alone and that the Alzheimer's Society is here to help. So we have a range of supportive services that are designed to assist you in your journey. So we've been noticing that these virtual sessions might be the way that you're connecting with us for the first time. So if that's the case and you'd like to know more about the programs and services that are available to you, we really suggest that you connect with Maddie. She's our intake coordinator, and she's the first point of contact for many people with the Alzheimer's Society. And she can connect you with the right person and the right program and resources to meet your needs. So if you're connecting with us for the first time and you're generally interested about what else is available to you for ongoing support for you and your family, feel free to connect with Maddie, and she can have a conversation with you about all of those different options. And we want to thank you for joining us today. We hope that you gained some tips or some insights for having some positive visits with the person living with dementia. So I think at this time we'll probably stop recording.